Heartbeat tonight. I can take the heat, baby, but believe that's the moment I shine. Everyone dance, takes the lead. Watch me. Over in my face. I feel the beat, don't forget to meet. I am the watch me. So silly, so silly.
My mic on. There we are. Hey, stand up. Join us in this song. We're gonna need your help clapping too. As people start getting in here, I know. Where is everybody? Help me out. You're our rhythm section today. Wonderful, so wonderful is your unfailing love. Your cross has spoken mercy over me. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no one can utterly know. How glorious, how beautiful. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul sings. Powerful, so powerful, your glory fills the skies. Your mighty works displayed for all to see. The beauty of your majesty awaits my heart to sing. How marvelous, how wonderful you are. Beautiful one I love. Beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul sings. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul sings. You opened my heart to your wonders anew. You captured my heart with this love. There's nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. You opened my eyes to your wonders anew. You captured my heart with this love. There's nothing on earth is as beautiful as beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul Sing, beautiful one, beautiful one, your beautiful one, my soul. Sing. Open my eyes to your wonders anew. You captured my heart with this love. There's nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. We did it. Give yourselves a hand. Have a seat real quick. Dar is celebrating two grandsons' graduations up in Oregon. She had one of her grandsons graduate from community college and another grandson graduate from high school. So anyway, hello, Dar and Ted. If you're watching this at all, then you know we're with you in spirit. So that means I'm Dar today. And so I got a few things for you that I'm definitely going to screw up. So more for her to talk about next week. All right. First thing is we're glad that you're here. You probably heard, if you were noticing my email or Facebook, that we got vandalized again on our frontage road sign. That is a pride sign and everybody welcome sign. And Lauren Koss was my guy on site to come and take it down and swap it out with a different one and also start the cleaning. Then he had a brilliant idea. Am I really loud out there, by the way? Yes. Okay. Bring me down a little bit. There you go. So his brilliant idea was to bring that sign here so that you could get your hands on it a little bit. He could have worked all day like he normally would and clean it all up and make it perfect. But I like his idea better, which is to give you the opportunity, if you want to scrape a little bit of that hatefulness off of that thing, then you can be a part of that. It's right out in the lobby. All you have to use to get that paint off of the sign is the hand sanitizer that we know and love since COVID. Isn't that crazy? Well, anyway, it's a paint stripper as well as a hand stripper. So do that. And then also there's a Sharpie there, and Lauren encourages you, I think this is also a great idea, to write the phrase "love wins" somewhere on that banner, and then we'll repost it somewhere. So anyway, you get to get your hands dirty literally and get a little bit more love in the world at the same time. Okay. Oh yeah, I should probably bring these up. Here we go. Next thing, in the back, we have our Change for Change things. We're running this campaign from Mother's Day until next week. If you haven't picked one up yet to put your change in the water bucket thing, then please do that. Thank you very much, Pam. Good reminder. We'll also take very quiet money too in the form of checks and bills. So we're cool with that. And this will help Faraha Community Center. We shifted our focus with them to allow room for others to get on board, and we're more project focused with them. So if you're unfamiliar, this is a school in one of the worst slums in the world outside of Nairobi, Kenya. And this school focuses on the poorest of the poor of the poorest of the poor. So that is the qualifier, is you have to be in the worst possible circumstance to make it into school. It's a total reversal of how we think about getting into one of the best schools in the country, literally. So anyway, help us out with that. If you want to get in on the last couple sessions with the Heart of Christianity, which I'm teaching through for this week and next week, and then we wrap that up. You're welcome to join me 12 o'clock and 7 o'clock on Tuesday. Next week, couple special things. It's Father's Day, so we're going to celebrate men. We're going to have a lunch right after church. And it's the first Sunday, hopefully, that will be outside. So bring an extra jacket if you need one. But we start our summer courtyard stuff next week, which is always fun and gets us right into a beautiful sanctuary out there. And it's always a great time. Now, I would like Stephen to come up, and he's got a couple of announcements to make. First, about building lasting bridges. Use your mic, please. And secondly, about a Juneteenth thing. There you are, sir.
Thank you. So we're going to continue building lasting bridges. We're going to meet up front today. We're actually going to meet again on the 25th. We got that cleared, right? So this week, building lasting bridges. Next week, Juneteenth. The week after, back to building lasting bridges. And then we'll see where we go from there. It's been a Good series so far, intimate little group setting. It's quick, but it is incisive and insightful. So please join us for Juneteenth. I think we've got 2 slides for this. Next Sunday, Juneteenth is actually the Monday, but next Sunday, we're going to celebrate the People Before Policy, JT, that you know that's been up here many times, is leading the first annual Juneteenth celebration at Oxbow Commons. It's 3 to 7. Program starts at 4. There is food, there is music. We got Dr. Tia Madison. She's a performer, scholar and performer, and she takes on the roles of strong Black women in our history in this country. And it's just fantastic. So we're delighted to have her. So come out, bring the kids. It's fun, little educational component, but if the sun is shining, Oxbow Common in the afternoon. Thank you.
Is it on the Sunday or the Monday?
It's on the Sunday.
It is on the Sunday. Okay, so we have the slide wrong then. So it should be June 18th, which is next week. So after you're done eating here, you can go down to the Oxbow Commons, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if you want to celebrate on Monday, American Canyon is having a massive Juneteenth celebration. So we didn't want to compete with them. So it's a
Cool.
It's a unity event.
Awesome. All right, thank you. There you go. Hey, and let's see, another save the date thing, July 2nd around Independence Day celebration. That's another time for us to do a picnic, and we will provide the fried chicken and you bring your favorite sides to go with it. So if that means you're like me, that means you go to Costco and pick out your favorite salad and make sure you put it together before you show up to church. All right, so that's what we got coming up. Should be good. And we deeply appreciate your support. Like I mentioned in the email yesterday, we are one of very few churches here in Napa that is truly welcoming and affirming of all people, regardless. There aren't that many of us. So your support really, really matters because we don't have anybody. I've put in a call to the Vatican and they're not sending us any money. We've put in calls to other places. They're not sending us any money. It's us. So it's what we do. And that means that I owe you and we owe each other a huge thanks because CrossWalk cannot be CrossWalk without your support. And we deeply appreciate that. So why don't you stand up, just say hi to each other and just introduce yourself. What's going on today? Hey, if you're sitting down, please stand up so we can sing a little better. Here we go. I love you, Lord.
For your mercy never fails me. And all my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. Every breath in me. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. You know me as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I oh, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. My life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running to me. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. Every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. Every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.
I want to lead you in a brief meditation before we move into a song that invites us into faith in a different level. It's a song called Oceans. Many of you are familiar with it. It's one of our favorites around here. about saying yes to the call of God forward in our lives, whatever that may be. Some of us, probably all of us, have brought things with us today. Things that are good. Some of us are celebrating great events in our lives. Some of us may be bringing blah. It's not particularly sunny today, and so maybe your personal weather doesn't feel too sunny today. Maybe some of you feel a little heavy today because of who knows what. Could be personal issues happening that only God knows, perhaps, the depths of things that you struggle with. It could be that, we had this vandalism thing happen and that ticks you off, and that it should. I just want you to be aware of what's happening in you before we head into meditation, where we try to slowly let these things go. Not a denial that these things exist, but just a statement with our breathing to say, we want to be fully present here and now. We want to be centered and grounded here and now. And those things which will come on our radar and crowd our attention will always come at us. And we have the choice to determine how much stickiness we give them in our lives. And the more we're able to breathe, the more we're able to let those things not have so much power in our lives and listen more for the still small voice of God. So a couple weeks ago, my family was in Yosemite for a family trip we've been looking forward to for a year. It was the first trip that Lynn and I and our kids, who are now grown and flown from the coop, and their significant others were able to be together on a trip. So it was a real test run to see, what's this thing really looking like? The significant others got a chance to decide, do I want any more part of this family? And we got the chance to kind of have eyes on things. And it was great. And my sister and her husband actually happened to be out here and joined us in the park as well. And of course, with the massive snowfall, the waterfalls that you expect to see are just incredibly powerful, more powerful than I've seen them. And I've been to the park 17, 18 times, I think. And magnificent. But then you get the bonus waterfalls that normally don't show up, except for maybe a week or two in late April, early May, from all the extra runoff. And so there's just waterfalls everywhere you look up, and it's stunningly beautiful. One of our favorite things to do when we're in the park, especially if we're staying in the park, is we like to, at dusk, just before sun sets, we like to go to El Capitan. This is one of the world's greatest granite face. What do we call this thing? It's not really a cliff. It's a monolith. Thank you. In the world, Free Solo has been, if you haven't seen that film, it's about a climber that did this whole thing without ropes and in a matter of hours instead of days. And it's remarkable to just pull off the side of the road and first just stare up at this massive rock. And you just see a massive rock. But the more you sit with it, the more you might be able with your naked eye to pick up just a hint of color. And if you squint real hard, maybe it's a backpack, or maybe it's a rope. And then if you are wise enough to bring binoculars with you and look through them, then a whole new world starts to appear. And you start to see that it's not just one speck of color, but it's maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 climbers kind of clumped together, and you see their lines. And then you begin to wonder, how many other climbers might there be on this rock face? And so, in our family, we had 4 different sets of binoculars, all kind of looking around. And now and again, you'd hear somebody say, well, I spotted another one. And so by the time it was getting too dark to see with the naked eye, and even with binoculars, we figured 7 parties up on the face that were going to spend the night somewhere around 500 to 1,000 feet, or maybe 1,500 feet, or maybe 2,000 feet, or maybe 2,500 feet off of the valley floor. These people are crazy, right? And the funny thing is people, because the way it works, if there's any crowd of people that's stopping, everybody in the park comes to a halt because they assume it must be a bear or some other wildlife. And so everybody pulls off to see what the heck we're looking at. But if they don't have binoculars, they just think we're nuts until we start talking about all these people. And so we thought when we got into our cars to make the loop back around, that we were going to be, we felt really good. We saw 8 climbers up there for the night. But then it took long enough for us to make the bend that we came around the other side as kind of a one-way loop. And we're on the other side of the meadow where we could see El Cap from a distance. And it was dark enough now that when we looked at El Cap, we recognized that we did see 8 climbing groups up there, setting up their tents for the night. But we missed 10 others. And the way you can spot them is because of the light that now is on the rock face and all different climbing routes. I thought, that's a pretty good metaphor for us in terms of our need to slow down and to breathe and to pay attention. Because could it be that there are incredible things to behold all the time if we would just slow down and pay attention? And some of our incapacity to see and hear and sense is because we haven't breathed, is because we haven't let go of the other things that are noisy in our worlds so that we can just perceive what is already here. So with that, if you would get comfortable and sit in a position so that you can breathe comfortably and easily, I invite you to take some deep, slow breaths with me, just to sort of get into a rhythm. And as you're breathing slowly, be aware of your body and how it feels, your feet grounded on the floor, how you feel in your seat, your shoulders, your face muscles. Is how your body feels commands attention. So just acknowledge aches and pains or how grounded you feel or good you feel. And just let that go. Say, I acknowledge that this is what I'm feeling physically. And why don't you take a moment, and as you continue to breathe slowly, just acknowledge all the to-do list types of things that are on your mind, the busyness of our lives. What are you thinking about as you've come into this space today? Just be aware of all the distractions that are on your mind, stuff to do, noises here, how delicious our donuts are, whatever it might be. Just identify it. Say, I acknowledge that these things are on my mind and they'll be on my mind soon enough, but right now, I just want to release these things into this river, let them flow downstream. I'll pick them up later. But right now, I just want to be here now, fully present. And you have an emotional state that you've brought with you today. It may be complex. You may be feeling multiple things at once. Or maybe one dominant feeling, whatever it is, recognize it, acknowledge it. And as you breathe out, release it into that stream. Now in a moment, I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath and to hold it for 6 seconds. So get ready for that. Let's do it together now. Breathe in and hold for 6 seconds. And exhale. When you hold a breath like that for 6 seconds, you activate your vagus nerve and you help yourself calm down. So God, we have come into this space for many reasons. We've come to see friends, to enjoy the communion of each other's company. We've come because it's part of our rhythm to give this portion of this day each week, to hit the reset button, pop off on our relationship with you, to be strengthened, to be stretched through all the elements of the service, through the songs, the meditation, the teaching to come. We come maybe to heal because we've really been through it in this chapter of our lives, be that chapter a day, a week, a month, a season. And we come here to be restored. God, may our decision to be still and quiet afford you more opportunity, more attention on our part to sense your love for us, you calling us in, calling us forward to greater and deeper well-being, greater expressions of shalom, that we might be more and more fully well. Amen. Shannon's going to come up and lead us in one more song.
On the waters, and know we may fail. Here I find you in the mystery, and oceans deep, and my faith will stand. Now I will call upon your name. Keep my eyes above the waves. Oceans rise, my soul can rest in your embrace. For I am you. So bounds in deepest waters, sovereign hand, be my guide. When deep end surrounds me, never fail, and you won't start now. Now you'll call upon your name. Keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours. You are my spirit. My trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you will call me. Take me where my feet would ever wander. My faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you will call me. Take me deep without wonder, and my faith made stronger in the presence of my Savior. I will call upon your name. Keep my eyes above the waves. When the oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I you.
All right. Thank you, Shannon, for your good work today. So we continue the series on the heart of Christianity. And I remember when I started this, I billed it as what I think is the best book out there on deconstructing and reconstructing your faith, which means that it can be incredibly challenging. And so far in the class that I've been following up with, which by the way has had just great attendance and incredible discussions every week, it has not failed. So we've seen people really work through this process and still working through this process. And I have news for you. If you've been paying attention to this or coming to my class, this is a process that should never, ever, ever end. Our life is a journey. Life is process. That's reality. And how can we learn and grow for the duration of our lives? That is really the question, which is a wonderful thing. I remember one time I was talking about this, and we had one of our saints here from years ago who passed away in recent years. Her name was Doris Alley. And I was talking about all these things, the faith asks us to do. And afterward, right out loud in the middle of the sermon, she says, "That sounds exhausting." Which, if you knew Doris, she'd just have this wonderful smile on her face. And she was a great example of what a Jesus follower can look like. And anyway, it's not that, though. It is an invitation to grow and become. It's an invitation to attend or to go visit Yosemite regularly and see new sights, new vistas, things you hadn't considered before, which is challenging, but the payoff is well worth it. So today we're going to be looking at a story that churches all around the world are looking at. This is one of the lectionary texts, and several of them are strung together. There's one that I really want to focus on today, so that's the one we're going to highlight. And all of the texts that global churches are looking at today deal with this calling forward into a new way of thinking. And this really dovetails perfectly with this idea of practices. What are we supposed to be doing as Jesus people, as people who claim to follow Jesus, claim to follow in the footsteps of Jesus? And so it started off, I'm not going to share this whole story, but it starts off with the calling of Sarah and Abram, who are the patriarch and matriarch of our faith and the Jewish tradition and also the Islam tradition. At least one of them, at least Abram is. And so these two, in their story of saying yes to an invitation to leave where they were and to start a new way of doing life and a new way of doing faith, is massive. They left their comfort, they left their renown, they took a lot of their money with them, so good for them, and some of their entourage, but their whole venture was to step out like this faith song that we just sang calls us to do. Try something new. Let's break the paradigms and start over. That's what they sense God calling them to do. Now, what happens right after the story we're going to look at in depth today, as you have Jesus inviting other people and working in this participatory thing of people coming and asking for help, and Jesus responding. And so it's this dance of people saying, yes, I want more, and God responding with yes in myriad forms. And we see that happen in a couple different healing stories. And Jesus, who is looked at as a rabbi and as a holy man, crosses lines he should not have been crossing, and religious people called him out for it. But there was something about Jesus that recognized that if our attitude is who is not in the club, we've already gotten off on the wrong step. If that's our primary question, how can we make the box smaller? You might as well just tell yourself, you are no longer in lockstep with the Spirit of God. You're no longer following in the footsteps of Jesus, who was radically inclusive. By the way, on this particular issue, and I'll talk more about this today because it lends itself to it, but regarding our stance, this is Pride Month, and we can truly celebrate that here at CrossWalk because we mean it. And we recognize the diversity in so many ways in our planet. And some of that has to do with LGBTQ sensitivities and ways that are not as common for some and more for others. And we just recognize and celebrate that our world is diverse and we have different expressions of life in many forms, including how we identify ourselves and gender, sexuality, orientation, all of those things. And so to that end, Stephen Corley reminded me, and I asked him to print off an editorial piece that showed up in the Napa Valley Register, who probably, since Stephen's on that board, he probably helped write this to some degree, maybe a paragraph or two. So anyway, he has some of these to hand out. If you didn't get a chance to read it, please read it. If my sermon gets really boring, at least you have an interesting read. So there's something there. So thank you, Stephen, for copying that out. And I encourage you to read it because Napa is an inclusive town. And I'll talk more about what that means and how do we think about these things. Because even today in our country and even in a mainline denomination called the United Methodist Church, this is still an incredibly divisive issue. And that very large denomination, who is very similar, by the way, to the American Baptist Convention of the United States, which is what we're a part of, they're very similar in their orientation on things. It is breaking them apart, and it's breaking hearts in the process. And it's sad to see that this is the reality. It's to be expected from human beings, but it's sad nonetheless. So let's take a look at a passage where Jesus is breaking through one of these barriers. So as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. So let's just stop for a moment and recognize some things here. First of all, we have a guy named Matthew. This happens to be from the Gospel of Matthew. This is the guy that this gospel is named after, which is remarkable because he's sitting at his tax collector's booth, which, if you've got your Sherlock hat on, what would you guess is his occupation? A tax collector, right. These were completely despised people in ancient Israel, even more so than IRS agents are today. And the reason they were is because they didn't have the interweb like we do today. They didn't have a gazillion forms that we could look at. They didn't have Google search that you could go and go through the archives to find out exactly to a penny how much you owed for your taxes. The person who told you what you owed was the tax collector. He knew exactly how much he had to get from you to satisfy Rome, but he had to decide how much more he could get away with to line his own pockets. And they did that very well, which is why they were extra hated. Beyond collecting taxes for Rome, they were looked at as traitors in that regard, but they were also looking at as benefiting off the backs of their own people. They were despised. But Jesus sees this guy who's absolutely despised and is not welcome in any Jewish circle, except in his own like-minded people, other tax collectors and other quote-unquote sinners. And Jesus sees this guy and doesn't shake a finger at him and say, naughty, 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 or you're sinful by your nature or by your choice. He says, follow me and be my disciple. Come and learn from me. Come and learn my way. And by the way, for a rabbi to invite somebody to be your disciple is no small thing. This is a very, very select audience. usually in the rabbinical world, you had to really go through the paces to be welcomed under the tutelage of a rabbi. The people that Jesus chose, not the ones who, had the best education, the best pedigree. He chose ordinary people. And now he's choosing more than an ordinary person. He's choosing somebody who is hated by his countrymen for a reason. Follow me, be my disciple. This is a huge, huge invitation to the table. And Jesus said to him, so Matthew got up and followed him. Remarkable. So something is transacting in Matthew. We're not sure what, but something enough for him to leave that, presumably, profession behind, walk away from the greed that was inherent in that, because he sensed there was something better with this Jewish peasant rabbi. I remind you that Jesus was not this really well-off, well-dressed, wearing the right shoes, wearing the right handbag, driving the right kind of camel. This is Jesus who's dirt poor, who most of his life was grateful to have one meal a day. And there were probably many days he did not. He was a carpenter, which did not mean like finished carpenter who can do good work for good money. He was probably like a rough carpenter of his day, meaning very little money, very little means to do well with. He was part of the 0.1% extreme peasant class. So for Matthew to look at him and say, I'd like more of what you've got, that's ridiculous. Something sparked with him and to say, I have to go with this guy. I can't not go with this guy. So later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home, which was probably a pretty nice home, as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. You know what that means? This is going to be a great party. That's what this means. This is going to be amazing. And so Jesus, this rabbi, and his followers are going to this party with all these people that nobody from the church crowd is okay with. They're in the wrong place now. But when the Pharisees saw this, probably from across the street, Pharisees, by the way, my friend and colleague, Jim Brenneman, who's spoken here, he's the president of our related seminary in Berkeley and also a biblical scholar. He would correct the gospel here and say that these are true Pharisees that we're looking at, but they're kind of Pharisees gone amok, because Jesus was a Pharisee and Jesus was a healthy, well-minded, growing Pharisee. But what we saw in Jesus's world, who were taking shots at him, especially in the northern region where the Pharisees dominated, they had gotten into the same rut that we often get into. They were focused on legalism. They were focused on the letter of the law instead of the spirit of the law. They were focused on keeping the box tight and small. And so they were reacting to what they were seeing. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, not Jesus, but his disciples, who were easier prey, why does your teacher eat with such scum? Now, I like that the New Living Translation, which I use a lot, gives us that word plainly, because it's probably a very accurate translation for what they thought of the partygoers in this space. And by extension, are considering whether or not the scumminess of the party hosts and comrades, just how much that scumminess was going to rub off on Jesus and the other disciples. Because the Pharisees, mind you, good church-going folk, would never be caught there with them. These others who have betrayed Israel and betrayed the faith. But when Jesus heard this, he steps in and he said, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. Then he added, now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. He's quoting scripture to these scripture nerds. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. Or put another way, from Eugene Peterson's translation called The Message, I'm here to invite outsiders, not coddle insiders. Pretty good stuff. Might want to memorize that one because that's a good practice of Jesus. Who are we as followers of the Spirit of God? And so my questions that I have for us today, pretty simple. So easy to answer. How are we like the characters in this story? And there are characters in the story that we want to be like. There are characters in this story that we wish we weren't like. And there are some characters in the story that we hope we're never like. And I'm wondering what your capacity is to be comfortable wondering about such things. And by the way, speaking of comfort and uncomfortableness, shout out to Gordon Wagner for teaching last week. I thought he did a fantastic job. Yeah, very good. And I just want to say, if any of you would like to make lots of people uncomfortable, you're welcome to teach. If you've got something, he told me 3 months ago, I've got a fire in my belly. I'd love to talk about this passage. And I knew it would fit last week. And so I knew I needed covering. And so it worked out great. If you've got a fire in your belly about something, I will help you craft stuff and think things through. I'll resource you with stuff, help you with stuff. We've had some people do this in the past. Pam Gums taught in January, which I deeply appreciated, a teaching she's probably given many times in her work with a nonprofit. So I knew she was a pretty easy handoff, and Gordon's been in theater forever. So I knew he was an easy handoff. So if it terrifies you talking, I can help some with that. But that's part of a wonderful reality of our church is we lean into the priesthood of all believers. And if you've got something to say, I want to help you define that and say it if you want. Just let me know, and we'll work on that together. So, but this all has to do with being uncomfortable. And so we have an uncomfortable thing right before us here, which is to wonder about ourselves. And then sort of these underlying questions as we sort that out. Who are we being invited to become? Because there are some invitations happening here all over the place in this story. And if we're being invited to become something, how do we go about doing that? And the reason on a day where we talk about practices, I'm so thrilled that this text showed up as the text to talk about, is because I could very easily talk to you about things that you already know about if you come to CrossWalk much. The 5 primary movements of Jesus that lead toward this newness of life, this abundance of life. Stretching as lifelong learners, always thinking, always wondering, what am I missing? What's possible? What haven't I thought of before? What am I not seeing yet? Serving each other, serving the masses, whoever they are, just because they're human beings and we should serve them. And not just human beings, but all of the creation. How are we serving the whole creation? And then standing up for grace and justice on individuals, extending grace. And when it's a group of people, that expresses itself as social justice. And so how do we do that as Jesus people effectively? How do we break away and connect with God? And how do we be incarnate with others in deep community? These are the 5 big steps. If you want to write all those down, you can also go to our website. They're all over the place there. I could have gone deep on this, but the reality is that I don't think those were the primary things for Jesus. I mean, they were, but I don't think that's where it all started. I think it started for Jesus where he just experienced something so profound of God late in life for him. He started his ministry somewhere maybe 30 to 36 years old, somewhere in there, which in that day and age, that's like late middle age. And so something shifted his thinking away from what was normal to something that was big and profound. And I think all those movements that I just described for Jesus, I think those just were fruits. I think he just did them naturally because he couldn't not do them. I think he had to know more and had to think more because he had such a hunger to know more. And I think he had to serve people because he could see them. He had a unitive vision that these are not others. These are not illegal. These are not sinful. They're people. And his heart broke because he recognized that the people had need and he could do something about it. He stood up for grace and justice because he recognized that there were some people in his world, just as there are in our world, who do not have the same level of access to things that maybe most other people do. And they don't have a voice with which they can raise their hand and say, I've got a problem here. And so he was the one to come along and lend his own voice and his own authority to their cause. And he did this for groups of people, like leper colonies. When he heals them, when he sends them home, it's like he's saying to the leaders of Judaism, you got this whole group wrong. When he heals people who've been born with whatever ailments they have and he heals them, he's saying to the religious authorities who said, you are the other, you are despised by God, you were born that way because God does not care for you. He was correcting that, saying, you've got it wrong. And he made it known. You know that he would break away for his camping trips and spiritual retreats and time alone in the morning to foster his reality with God. And he did his whole ministry not alone. He was not the Lone Ranger, but he did it with friends so that he could be with them and they could impact him and he could impact them. It was a beautiful thing, and I think it all came very naturally. Now, some of us, my guess is if we took time to tell everybody our story about how we came to faith, I would guess that many of you have had one of those seasons in your life where you had an aha moment, maybe where you gave your life over to this thing we call faith. You might have used different words for it, where on the back end of it, you would say, that's the day that I got saved. You might use that language, or that's the day where I was born again. You might use that language. That's the day I had the epiphany that changed my life. That might be it. That's the day I became a believer of some kind, or I took a deeper step of commitment that really was a milestone in my life, all those things. And if you're like me in my stories, because I've had multiple milestones like that, then you can resonate with what I'm saying. Because in that moment of white hot passion for God, you probably very naturally did all those things. You wanted to know more. You wanted to serve more. You wanted to care for those who were getting picked on. You wanted to be with other believers to study and understand and be a part of this thing. And you wanted to have a deeper personal relationship with God. Am I right? Is that about right? But then what happens? Sometimes life goes on. We get distracted by reality. And that white hot passion starts to cool. And just like an ember in a fire that is pulled away from the rest of the coals, it starts to get a little less warm. And we find ourselves, maybe I'm the only one, but we find ourselves less apt to do those things which were once so easy and natural and unforced. We don't find ourselves spending much time studying as we once did. We're not serving as much and as easily as we once did. And sometimes it even gets uglier than that. Maybe we feel like we're obligated to serve, and so we're serving out of obligation, and that is okay for a moment. But I've seen this destroy people over time. I mean, destroy people, so that they feel so obligated to serve, even in the church, that they get utterly fried. They're no longer walking in their true selves because they're too angry. No, not what they once were. Sometimes we used to show up for people and we haven't. Sometimes we would break away to be with God so naturally, and we find ourselves not doing that. We find ourselves pulling away from community. Well, why is that? And how do we correct that? Well, I got some good news for you. Just on the one side, that I think that all those movements of Jesus, they do come naturally like fruit on the vine. When we're white hot passionate for God, those same movements can help us get back to the passion. We don't have to recreate the passion out of thin air. But by doing the footsteps of Jesus, this is sort of the difference of two different frames of psychology. And what I'm talking about is a behavioral approach to psychology. And in terms of your faith development, if your faith is dead, take a look at your life. Are there things missing from your life that you know that Jesus did? And if you can look at just starting with those 5 areas, if you can say, well, are you doing anything to learn anymore in your faith? And if your answer is no, great news. You can start today, and I will give you a library of books to choose from and boring videos. Thank you, Gordon, to watch if you'd like, if that's what you want. Or maybe you're seeing that you're not doing anything for anybody else. You're not serving in any other way, which means that you're kind of getting boxed in and insular. And so maybe serving is going to be that thing that helps you get back in step with Jesus, or maybe it's standing up for somebody with grace and justice, or maybe it's reintroducing spiritual disciplines into your lives, or maybe it's just being in closer community and growing together. Just as it works one way very naturally, it also, I think, can work the other way very naturally. And by the way, none of this is because you have to do it. I've got fantastic news for you. You don't have to do any of this. And God isn't going to love you less. You don't have to do any of it. You are under no obligation to say yes to any of this. Just like Matthew was under no obligation to say yes to follow. And the other people who he invited to his party, his own only friends, other tax collectors and sinners, they were under no obligation to come to the party. And maybe there were some who chose not to come because they were worried that maybe it was a setup, that maybe this Pharisee called Jesus was going to act just like so many Pharisees did to them in their past. And they said no to the invitation. They missed out on the kegger and the good food and stuff. Invitations abound. The Pharisees were invited to open their eyes to see people not as their labels that they have helped create, but as human beings who God loves. And they had the option to say yes to that invitation or no to that invitation. The disciples, they had the option probably to dial it in and maybe say to Jesus, hey, I heard about the party night. Hey, so sorry. Just not feeling up for it. Just a little bit tired. Had a long day fishing, and I'm going to nap instead, if that's okay with you, Jesus. And you know what? Jesus would have said to Peter or his brother, he said, that's cool. That's fine. Rest is good. Rest is good. The invitation is just here for you to do what you want with. And that should feel really good. Because the God that we are here to try to understand who this being is, this spirit, this presence, is gracious like that. But I want to talk about some uglier things in this story, about how did the Pharisees get to this place? The ones who weren't great Pharisees here, who were picking on the disciples and then got schooled by Jesus. How did they get like they were? How did they get to such a place where they and so many others that they led had such a terrible attitude and perspective on tax collectors? I don't know for sure. We don't have that much information on a lot of characters that we see in stories like this. But I wonder if Matthew is like me in his job. Both of my grandpas were Baptist pastors, like me. Well, not like me, but you get the idea. And my dad was a Baptist pastor. I mean, born into my family with my gene pool and my history, I could have easily said to anybody who was wondering about me, who I am, why are you becoming a pastor? Why would you do that? I could easily punt and just say, well, how could I not be? My brother struggles with that. I don't think he'll be upset at me saying this, not that he'll be tuning into this, but he's an incredibly gifted person, incredibly bright person. I think he could have been great as a pastor, but he chose not to do that because he recognized that his true passion has to do with mechanical engineering. And he's a great mechanical engineer. And he's amazing with his hands. He can fix anything. He can build anything. He can understand all kinds of building kinds of stuff and scientific stuff because that's how his brain is wired. But I know he struggles. He struggles because he didn't follow in the family business. Would it be possible for a person like Matthew, if he was like me, to just kind of say out loud, well, I was kind of born into this. I was kind of born to be a tax collector. So blame my parents and blame my grandparents because it's their genes that are floating in my blood. Or maybe they would just say, you know what? Life is short and I'm getting nowhere as a carpenter here in northern Israel and Galilee. And so I just want to make a buck. I'm tired of seeing my wife and kids not have a meal. And I saw the flyer, got it in the mail from the Roman government, looking for new agents. And I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to give it a shot. They had on-the-job training and everything. And so I went for it and I got the gist and I found out at first I was going to go in all honest and just be straight up. This is all it takes. But then, you're kind of in a culture and the culture is greedy. And I just kind of found myself swept into this thing. And all of a sudden I was just like every other tax collector. So sorry, but I just kind of got swept into the whole thing. And now they're being judged as they should be. But what was lost sight by the Pharisees is that at the end of the day, they're not tax collectors, they're human beings. And so I wonder if we struggle with that in any way in our culture. And in my email that I sent out to you yesterday, in response to the graffiti stuff, and this is not the first time, we've probably had this happen half a dozen times over the years, and it'll happen some more. And we'll just buy more hand sanitizer and more posters and more Sharpies and more zip ties to put those back up. But I mentioned in there that I can only imagine what the ones who crossed out our welcoming sign or tried to, I can only imagine what they were thinking based on my own experience in my own life. And so I just want to touch on that to find out if any of us here struggle being the not so good kind of Pharisee like I have. Because that's one of the characters that we see here. And my hunch is I may not be alone in my human experience. I grew up a product of the 1980s. I was in middle school and high school in the 80s, and the 80s was not as open as we are in today's culture. We made fun of people who were gay. It was an insult to call somebody gay if they were your friend. And that's just what everybody did. And I didn't think a lot of it because that's what everybody thought. And so if you fell in line with this kind of a rhetoric and just saw people in that way as weird or different, or, push them aside as the other, there was very little pushback to that, because the whole culture was essentially saying, yeah, that's right. And it wasn't just in my high school, it was in every high school. I was in the theater department, and it was still present there, where maybe part of your brain might think, I know you played football and basketball and stuff. Yeah, but I was really in the theater department. And sure, it showed up in sports, like you might guess. But it was also in theater, which was somewhat surprising. Not as bad, and you'd get a little bit schooled if you were reckless with your behavior, reckless with your attitude in front of the teachers primarily, who knew better and who would speak into such things. But it wasn't just the school, it was the culture, it was the church culture, it was what was on movies, it was what was perpetrated in comedians, it was absolutely everywhere. This was the air that we were breathing in our entire culture. Am I wrong on this? Am I right? This is everywhere. And so, of course, it makes sense that being a product of the culture that I'm swimming in, that I would reflect in some ways, to some extent, that culture. The only thing that buffered me, really, was that my parents were graceful Christians. They weren't the judgmental Christians. I never heard about hellfire brimstone stuff growing up, or my motive for following Jesus never had to do with threats of hell. Never. It was always about, we want to be good people in the world. And so part of that rhetoric was, you be kind to everybody. And so that acted as a governor on me. I wasn't always kind, but I wonder what it would have been like in my world if they'd have modeled something very different, if they were outspoken about their hatred and their worldview and were slurring. I never heard them slur anything, but what would it be like if I heard them do all kinds of slurs against people like this? My hunch is that if my role models, my parents, were doing this, then I would be more apt to behave like them, because they're my role models. They're the ones who are teaching me what it looks like to be a human being. And if they're Christians, then all the more. Lynn and I came across this bumper sticker the other day. Let me see if I can find this just briefly. We both read it. Lynn took a picture of it. Here it is. Can you all see it? Of course not. So on this car, it just simply reads, this is just a couple days ago, straight, conservative, Christian, gun owner. And when Lynn and I read that, after we vomited for a while, then we came back and we talked about, that sucks. It really sucks that within Christianity, within the church itself, we are struggling to follow such a basic thing that Jesus taught and modeled. And we can't seem to get it right. I mean, we kind of are, we're moving forward, but I guess I'm trying to confess to you that I struggled with this particular issue because I didn't know that I should be struggling with this issue. You know what I'm saying? The whole culture is oriented a particular way. That's the way every voice was saying, almost every voice was saying, this is how you should think. The only one that was different, the only voice that was different, something in here. That when I got to know a couple of my classmates, first in high school and then in college, that started to change. And one was a fellow classmate in high school who was just effeminate. And he knew he couldn't express more than that. But I saw how he was treated, and I thought it sucked. And I never gave him crap because I knew that he was gay. You know what I mean? Even as I'm telling friends they're gay and trying to insult them, it doesn't make any sense, but you get what I'm saying. In college, that grew even more intense for me to recognize, who the hell am I? Who the hell am I to tell another child of God that they are unloved by God? And that started to grow in me, but it also got shifted for a while. So when I was in seminary, I was kind of, in a very diverse environment and came out of that, but I was really informed by a conservative Christianity, which was very effective at that time. And using some of their bells and whistles helped grow churches that I've led. And so what I didn't realize, that along with the bells and whistles and their methodology came a theology that was not so lovely toward the other. And so for my first church, and even for my first few years here, I was not where I am now. I was not. I wish I could tell you differently. I wish I could tell you that, from day one here, I was putting out the pride flags, but I was not, because I could not. Because it hadn't fully dialed in yet. It took years. It took years for me to do the study, to see what was really happening scripturally. And that helped a lot. That helped my brain make sense of things and help me understand, just to say this absolutely clearly, that what the Bible is talking about is not what we're talking about today. That we're talking about people who are virtually raped in different ways. That's what you're looking at in the scriptures. The Old Testament and New Testament both. We are not talking about a same gender covenant who want to do life together and want to pursue shalom together and the depths of love together. That's not what the Bible is talking about when they're talking about anything to do with homosexuality. Go watch my sermon if you don't believe me. But the beautiful thing is that helped free me up. And it was like, I knew it. And it helped me get stronger and more bold emotionally, which gave me a new clue that some of what we're talking about here is only partly intellectual. In fact, I'm confident that even if you listen to my sermon on this, or many others that are out there now from other scholars who are much more scholarly than me, who come at it not just from that one angle of biblical interpretation, but bring a whole lot of extra theology to it too, so that by the end of it, when you get it all together, you're like, how have we been missing this for so long with this particular community, this community group of our neighbors? Intellectually, you will get it. And yet there will be something in you that is still saying no. And that has to do with your emotional space. I imagine many moons ago that there were people who dared to say that the earth was round and that it revolved around the sun. And these heretics started saying it out loud. And you know what happened? They were shunned for their beliefs. And even after people could see the scientific evidence for this reality, the emotional pull to not go against the cultural reality was so strong they dared not say it, think it, believe it. Better to just ignore it and go on with your life. After all, what difference does it make to me if the earth is flat or round? If I say it one way or another, not going to make any difference. I'm going to go tomorrow. I'm going to wake up and the dawn's still going to rise in the east and set in the west. Doesn't matter if the earth is round or flat, no matter what I think, who cares? But the reality is that we got to care because we are not I and me, we are we. And when we abuse one for their way of being and who they are, we're abusing all, even if we can't see it. We eventually end up hurting ourselves. Where are you on this issue and other issues like it? I mean, this is a hot button issue, the hottest button issue in the church today. And now I'm telling you without any question at all that I'm for equality, equity the whole way through from a biblical, theological perspective, from an intellectual standpoint, but also from my heart. That these are neighbors. These are Matthews. These are people who did not have the choice. It's who they are. But we could easily talk about women and equality and ministry and wonder why that isn't there. We could then really make everybody uncomfortable. And we could start talking about race issues and wonder, is it possible that our country had foundations that did not look equitably on people with varying skin tones? I don't mean to, maybe this is new information to you, but is it possible that that reality has not gone away? And who would we ask to find out if it has gone away or not? Don't ask Pete Shaw, because I'm a Dutch white guy. How would I know? Maybe we need to ask people who don't look like me. What are things really like for you? Maybe we need to ask people who are not straight. Tell me about your experience. Maybe, especially men who love to mansplain, need to ask women, what is it like to be in a still masculine-dominated culture? Maybe when we start to listen, instead of being the Pharisees on the other side of the street, just going through our old tapes, our old cultural conditioning, maybe if we start being more like the good Pharisee Jesus and come alongside and see the humanity, maybe that will begin to soften us. Maybe when we find out that God loves everybody truly equally and is with them equally, maybe then we'll actually start to believe and grow on the depth of God's love and grace for ourselves. Maybe you're in a roadblock because you're not sure if God is really with you anymore. Maybe it's when we communicate grace and love to another through our listening and our understanding, and we begin to believe it again for ourselves. So what does it mean to follow in the footsteps of Jesus? What does it mean to practice like Jesus? It's all in this one story. It's all there. It's the reaching out. It's seeing people differently. It's choosing to invite in. It's choosing by that invitation to say that there is more. Everything is wrapped up into this story, and all of us is wrapped into this story. There are some days when I bet you're a lot like Jesus. Keep going and doing that. There are some days when you're the draggies like the disciples, and you're just trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Where is Pete taking us now? Cool. All right. There are some days where you're like the draggies from Matthew's friends who are just coming in to try to understand this new reality called process theology or whatever Borg has to say, and so many other voices that are stretching our thinking all the time. How big is God? How much more can we take? And the beauty of that. And unfortunately, there are times when we feel judged like Matthew, and worse when we are the judger, like the Pharisees who didn't get it. What is the Spirit saying to you today about practicing, about following in the footsteps of Jesus? I want to have just a moment of quiet with you, and then we'll get to this prayer. It's a rendition of the Lord's Prayer. I modified it a little bit here and there, so that's just to keep you awake. But before we get to that, we'll say that out loud. Then I have one final thing that we're going to do together after we do the Lord's Prayer. But for now, just if you don't mind, just close your eyes and be still a moment. And is there anything at all that maybe from what I said, or maybe nothing of what I said, but what the Spirit is saying to you today? Is there any take home for you today? Very specifically for you. Not a generality like, oh yeah, I got to be nice people, that kind of thing. No, for you as a person. What are you being invited into? The Spirit of God is within you and all around you, speaking to you, nudging you. What does the Spirit of God want you to do in response? What is the invitation, the action for you today? Maybe for some of you, it is truly actionable, like, oh, I need to study more. I need to serve more. I need to grace more, be with other people more. I need to spend more quiet time with God. But maybe for some of you, it's time to look in the mirror and be honest about who you are and who you're becoming. Spirit of God, give us courage, even as you give us clarity. Because as wonderful and as beautiful as the shalom you invite us into is, it is terrifying to look at ourselves. We don't want to see the ugly parts that are true of us. We skirt around those with our friends. And yet, to go through that, to ask the question and to really listen and see for ourselves, who have we been, who are we now, and who are we becoming? This leads to beauty, to beauty, to beauty, to depth, to depth, to depth, even though difficult. God, help us. So to that end, we want to pray this prayer together, an adaptation of Jesus's prayer, the Our Father. Let's say it together. Our loving, supportive, holy Abba, your presence is here and everywhere. May your divine commonwealth come. May your will be done through us. We are grateful for the gift of food and work for all to eat their fill. May we work for a world where mutual grace and respect abound. May we foster shalom everywhere. Strengthen us for the work we're called to do. Amen. Let it be so. Final thing we're going to do, we're going to sing an old civil rights song that I think literally was born out of the 60s, maybe the 70s. And it's simply called They'll Know We Are Christians by Our Love. We're going to do 3 of these verses. If you don't know the song, you're about to know it. And someday we'll get it. It's a very easy thing. So here, let's stand together. This will be our collective benediction to remind ourselves what we're really all about. Here we go. Just follow me. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. We are one in the Spirit. Yeah, march it. We are one in the Lord. And we pray that all unity may one day be restored. And they'll know we are Christians by our love. By our love, yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. We will walk with each other. We will walk. You guys marching out there? We will walk with each other. We will walk hand in hand. And together we'll spread the news that God is in our land. And they'll know we are Christians by our love. By our love, yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. We will work with each other. We will work side by side. We will work with each other. We will work side by side. And we'll guard each man's dignity and save each man's pride. And they'll know we are Christians by our love. By our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Now go do it. Thanks for coming.